Hello everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania month webinar, Modern Fleet Vehicles, Fleet Vehicle Selection, Electric Vehicle Safety. I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania. Please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. Please type and submit any questions that you have for today's presenter into the questions window on your control panel. Questions will be answered at the end of today's webinar. Today's webinar is also being recorded. Please visit worksafe.tas.gov.au's YouTube page to view that webinar at the end of WorkSafe Tasmania month. I would now like to introduce your presenter today from Performance Driving Australia, Mark Butcher. Mark has over 25 years experience in designing and delivering advanced driving programs in Australia and overseas. He has delivered road safety programs, four-wheel drive training, tactical driving, precision driving and motorsport training for thousands of drivers, including tactical driving programs for military and law enforcement agencies in Australia and overseas. Mark has an extensive background in motorsport spanning over 20 years. He has driven in multiple world championship rallies and has raced cars on many of the circuits in Australia. Still heavily invested in motorsport as a driver, team manager and event organiser, one of Mark's favourite quotes is, "You don't know what you don't know," as he never stops learning and gaining new skills and knowledge that he can share with his clients. And we welcome Mark today.
G'day, thanks Stephanie. It does make me sound a bit more interesting than perhaps I am, but I'm going to do my best to try and live up to that expectation at the start. So today's presentation is actually a little bit different, and with that last quote there about you don't know what you don't know, I think leads perfectly into what we're going to chat about today, which is fleet selection, but with a focus on EVs. So obviously we're seeing more and more of them on the road every day. You know, maybe 5 years ago it was a rarity to play spotter and see a Tesla zipping around, whereas now there's cars that even I haven't seen before getting around, and it's becoming more common. So hence the next sort of 25 minutes or so, we'll have a bit of a chat about things that you should be looking at when you're selecting vehicles for your workplace, so that you know you can get your job done safely, have people in efficient vehicles, and obviously the inclusion of EVs and some thoughts about what we should look at when we consider those type of vehicles in our fleets. The other side, of course, will be also looking at the safety of and I guess some of the differences of driving EVs on our roads, which again, if you haven't experienced them, it's quite different. And I think most people, the first time they've ever driven one is literally they're just given the key and off they go. So I think it is quite a sizable step in technology for a lot of us that grew up in years gone by where we had cars with just manual and no ABS and no stability control and all these other things, to vehicles now in the space of maybe 20 or 30 years that almost drive themselves, and with obviously different power systems and things, to even just when it comes to charging them up. So we'll have a bit of a chat about those things. So I guess just wait for the slide to update, hopefully. Thank you. So a bit of an introduction into what an EV is. So a conventional engine. Now you can drive that. Can you drive that back for me, Stephanie? A conventional engine, which is an internal combustion engine, like we see in our petrol and diesel cars, is obviously the most common ones. It's just shot forward now. It's obviously a bit of a delay there. So let's just see if we can wind back. Need to go back. One more, I think. So yeah, internal combustion, thank you, we're in the right place here. So internal combustion engines, pretty much what we see in all our normal vehicles. Now when it comes to electric vehicles, there are a few different types. Do you want to just see if we can get to that next slide for me? Okay, perfect, thank you. I won't touch it again, so I'll let you drive it, so we don't end up confusing the system. So electric vehicles, there are two different types. There's your battery electric vehicles, where basically they have a combination generally of all electric power, and then there's your hybrids or HEVs, and they are generally a mixture of both petrol and electric engines, and then there's your plug-in hybrids, which are also basically full electric that you can plug in. So there's a few varieties there. The last one on my list there, which is probably the one that we're interested in the near future, or hopefully near future, which is fuel cell vehicles, which will run on hydrogen. And very rare at the moment, but it's definitely something that I think is gaining a fair bit of interest. I think there's some arguments for, you know, electric cars being environmentally beneficial in a lot of ways, but obviously still have some challenges with the way that the energy is generated, whereas a hydrogen or fuel cell vehicle is an even cleaner option again. So we'll have a bit of a chat about those different things, but just so you can understand the difference, that there are multiple types. So when you go and buy a car, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's a plug-in hybrid, or whether it's a full electric vehicle, are all terms that they might throw at you, but you need to just understand the main differences there. And it really is asking questions when you're looking at vehicles, looking at fleet vehicles, to find out exactly what you're getting, because a lot of people are driving around in cars, modern cars now, that have hybrid type systems, but they're not even sure how they work or anything. They just pretty much drive it like a normal car, not understanding whether or not you can actually plug it in or not, whether or not it needs to be plugged in, all those factors as well. So we'll just move to the next slide, thanks. Super delayed at my end, but hopefully everyone else is, there we go. So just some, this is general fleet selection, but I'll put, again, a focus on electric vehicles for you. So whenever you're looking at fleets, we're involved with a lot of training, obviously, in the corporate space, and quite often we get people attend our training in vehicles that we feel are not the best fit for purpose. In other words, you know, often, you know, they might be selected based on price or availability, and obviously that sometimes is a factor, but we think that with correct planning we can find vehicles that are more suited to different work environments. So for example, things to consider about cabin space and comfort. A lot of these new vehicles have a lot of features, and one of the ones that I've noticed is electric seats and seat heaters and coolers, but as a result the seats themselves are bigger and higher up, and sometimes if you're tall, that's actually going to impact on your cabin space and the comfort when you can't actually get the seat down low enough that you can be comfortable while driving the car. So these are little things that you should be consulting with your employees, especially if they're spending a lot of time on the road, to make sure that, you know, they are comfortable in the vehicles, because by being comfortable, they're always going to be able to respond better to any type of hazard that might approach. But on top of that, also less fatigue and other factors. So overall, just provide a better driving experience. If we're talking EVs, range requirements, and what I've done over here on the left-hand side is listed basically the top 20 ranges of some of the vehicles available now you can go and buy, and you can see typically around that 500 to 600k mark is pretty standard now, when perhaps, you know, a few years ago that certainly wasn't the case. And I think when you really think about it, most of us will be filling our cars up around about every 500, 600k. So we actually have the same sort of range with the convenience of we can actually recharge these vehicles either at home or at the workplace. So in other words, you may never have to go to a service station again, because you can actually, you know, do that sort of recharging at your own convenience and pretty much overnight, for example. So there's some big gains to be had there. I mean, no one likes to queue up at the service station and then be forced to buy 2 chocolate bars or whatever for your discount. That's going to be a thing of the past once we get to these more and more electric vehicles where we can charge them at home or in the office. A lot of workplaces are now bringing in EV chargers, and that's, you know, a really positive thing. Payload capacity, again, whether you're driving around with just normally 1 or 2 people in the car, whether you're going to be carrying 4 or more adults, whether or not you need to put stuff in the boot, or if it's a commercial vehicle, definitely give that some thought. We often see, particularly with sales reps and people on the road, with vehicles that don't have a lot of payload area in the back, and I find that a lot of people take the cargo barriers out to give them more room, and that's obviously a bit of an issue. So make sure, you know, buy a wagon or buy something that's big enough to carry the equipment that you're going to expect your employees to drive around with. Cargo barriers and all those things are essential for that safety, and we do see a lot of compromising because the vehicles aren't really, again, fit for purpose for what they're being made to carry around. So something like understanding the type of driving they're doing, what they're expected to carry around, should all be factors when it comes to selecting your fleet. The total cost of ownership, again, is something that should be considered. Electric vehicles run very low servicing costs. So as a result, over a period of time, actually can be quite cheap to operate, particularly when compared to doing oil changes and spark plugs and all those other things we have to worry about on a conventional engine. And the resale value, which again is another consideration. Electric vehicles are an unusual one at the moment. There are second-hand vehicles coming up on the market, and it's interesting to see the price hasn't come down a lot. So currently the resale is pretty good. I think there'll be some nerves about the battery life, a bit like buying a second-hand mobile phone. Do you feel like it's going to last as long? And that's a little bit of an unknown quantity, but they're things that we're going to be obviously more educated about in time, and something to think about when you are talking to a fleet. If you're looking at buying a fleet of vehicles, have a talk about what's the battery life, what's the expectations at the end of the battery life, and is that cost going to mean the vehicle's worth nothing at the end of the term? So just factors like that we should look at. Next slide, please. So they're the basic sort of considerations. I think when we talk about the environment, are they really better for the environment? So it depends on how that electricity is generated. We're very lucky in Tasmania that the bulk of our electricity here is actually delivered through renewable energy, and as a result, electric vehicles, in a sense, do make good sense because we're getting the energy from renewable sources, and we can recharge the vehicles and go about with very minimal emissions. Obviously, as it says there, that Australia-wide, the studies found electric vehicles emit between 29 and 41% less emissions than an ICE vehicle for every kilometre driven. So that's taken into all those considerations, and I think it's a positive plus. So there's a lot to be said for reduction of obviously pollution of the environment and all the other factors that come about from more conventional vehicles. Interesting to note down there, though, this in 2021, which is the most recent one I could find, which was that our electric vehicles in the market at the moment only make up 1%. So we've got a long way to go. I feel like that number has come up considerably in the last year or two. Just by driving down the road, I often see maybe 1 in every 10 or 1 in every 8 or even less. So there's more and more electric vehicles on the road, and I think that's something that we're going to see more of, and it'll be interesting to see if we then see some reduction in emissions as a result of that. Okay, next slide, thanks. Sorry about the pause, it's just a bit slow at this end as well. Okay, so why electric vehicles for fleets? Effectively the cost savings and government incentives. At the moment, unfortunately, Tasmania is the only state that's not offering any financial incentives for organisations. However, there is an FBT exemption. So where that comes into play is if you work for an organisation and you offered a company vehicle, if you actually purchase an electric vehicle, you can use it for your own use on weekends and everything like that, and you won't be stuck with the fringe benefit tax. Now, I'm not an accountant or a taxman, but you can speak to your accountant about that. But that is definitely a big incentive for a lot of people who are looking at getting a novated lease or some type of lease, which typically would attract FBT. There is an exemption there. So it's a good reason to go and find out about that. From an employer's point of view, it's a great way to perhaps reward your employees because you can perhaps look at providing a company vehicle that they can also use without being penalised. So there's the cost savings and there's government incentives there as well. Just before we go to the next slide, you can see over here, commercial EVs are not really available in Australia yet. They're just starting to roll out. There's been some challenges because they're heavier and bigger. By the time we put batteries into them, they have reduced range and reduced payload. So we're a little bit away from every second ute on the road becoming electric, but I think it's something, again, we will see in the very near future. Next slide, thanks. Infrastructure, this is important. So if you are looking at buying electric vehicles, of course, it was important to know where you can charge them up. So there's public charge stations, and then there's home office charge stations. I think the important thing to realise is that, again, this network is growing exponentially with more and more available charging stations. And they're pretty easy to use. In most cases, it's not much different to using a normal Bowser. You plug in. The good thing is it's a bit like a mobile phone. It'll tell you exactly how long it's going to take to charge, and you can actually unplug it and stop the charge at any time. But often, from my experience, charge times around 20 minutes to half an hour will give you around about that 80% charge mark, which is pretty good. So we can see on the left-hand side down there, the ultra-fast chargers. There are a few of those around. You're talking about 4 to 15 minutes for a full charge. Fast chargers, 20 to 30 minutes. And a slow charger, which is what you'd have at home typically, is around about up to 7 or 8 hours. So if you think about it, if you get home, plug it in overnight, by the morning, you're just about fully charged again. So there's definitely some advantages there. As long as you're staying within that 500 kilometre range, you're really not going to ever suffer. But definitely, I think of the big advantage here is the price. A 60 kilowatt battery costs between $24 and $42 to fully charge, which gives you around that 450k range, 5 to 9 cents per kilometre. With the price of fuel the way it is at the moment, if that doesn't sell electric cars to most people, I don't know what else will. I think that's a huge, even myself, I like my old school petrol engines, but when you start filling your car up and it's costing you $150 or $200 every tank, I think as opposed to maybe $30 or $40 a tank, effectively there's a huge saving to be had. And if you've got a fleet of vehicles, you multiply that by 10, 20, 100 vehicles, I think the savings go without saying that it's definitely why they should be considered. And even for a small fleet, so we might, I'm not sure who's tuned in today, but you might only have 3 or 4 vehicles on the road. That might pay for them, you know, almost. If you think what you're going to save in fuel would make the repayments on those vehicles. So definitely a big consideration when it comes to those sort of things. Next slide, thanks. So I guess the next thing is to talk about driving them. If you have driven one, they're very much like a normal car. The big difference is obviously they're very quiet, very smooth. There's no gear changing. There are some EVs with gears, very few, but there are some. They only have usually 2 gears. The majority of them, it's no gears. So when you drive off, it's just smooth and seamless. There's no hesitation, no kicking back or anything like that, which is nice if you need to speed up or go around somebody. You're not waiting for the engine to do anything. Very responsive. Low center of gravity. So the weight's all low, which actually makes them more safe in an accident because they're less likely to want to tip over or roll over because the weight is down low. So that's definitely an advantage. They are heavier, so potentially do take a little bit longer to stop. Our experience is that the brakes are engineered quite well, and they also use regenerative braking to help, so that ultimately they aren't terrible at braking, but they're probably on par with most cars considering the excessive weight, or the you know, most of these EVs are around about the 2-ton mark. Some of them are even more. The latest safety features, you know, being electric, they can do all sorts of cool stuff. Like you can have the car left on effectively with your dog in there and the aircon running, and it doesn't matter because you don't have to have the engine running like in a conventional car. So there's some big advantages there as far as safety features, security systems. It just opens the door up because it's its own power source. It doesn't need to run a petrol engine to run any of the other ancillary features of your car. So there's some good reasons. Just to note that in the event of a fire, there is a bit of a fear that people don't really know what to do. Statistically, they've proven that most electric car fires have just been traditional fires and not actually anything to do with the battery systems. If the battery system was to have an issue, then it's generally a good idea, obviously, to isolate yourself, move yourself away from the vehicle. And if you've been in any type of accident as well, the vehicle should be parked away from everything and left for quite a period of time before you got someone who's an expert in that field to come and have a look. So if you haven't had an accident, even if it's just a nose to tail, I'd be putting the car away from the side of the road and just leaving it and not driving it until you've had someone with the right technical experience to come and make sure that the battery hasn't been ruptured. Because sometimes what's happened is that these vehicles have had an accident and it's only 2 or 3 days later that they've actually caught fire and people are still driving them around, and then they're surprised. So inherently safe, but if you have an accident, pretty much like any car, you could rupture a brake line, rupture a fuel line. You will find out later, and it's no different to these. So just understanding that as well. Next slide, please. So I guess this is where we come in, is the driving and training side. I think it's a really good idea for people to understand how their vehicles perform. We were recently lucky enough to work with a manufacturer and have some electric vehicles. We've worked with several of them actually over the time, and just giving drivers the opportunity to understand what they feel like when they're braking, learn about that regenerative braking. So in other words, I think what some people call one pedal driving, I've got a bit of a note there about that, but it just means when you take your foot off, it'll actually start to slow down for you. In fact, in a lot of electric cars, you only need the brakes just to stop. Normal traffic driving and most of your highway driving, you'll very rarely use the brakes because the car can actually regenerate energy when you take your foot off. So just getting experience with that, understanding the weight differences, and just being confident inside the vehicle. They are easy to drive. I will say that they all have unusual characteristics with the way the gear systems work, how you engage them, and that's something that you need to be familiar with. So if you're looking at a fleet of vehicles, and a lot of this training you can do in-house, we're not against that. We just want people to be trained and educated. So whether you come up with a program yourselves, with a manufacturer, with a third party like ourselves, we're all, you know, any of those options are valid. But just make sure you have some training and make sure that people are comfortable. Because I was chatting to some fleets the other day, and they said that they've got EVs and normal cars, and often people take the normal cars because they're too scared to take the EV because they don't know what to do if it goes flat or where to charge it. So, you know, it's a shame that the fleets bought the vehicles and they're not being used because there's a lack of education there. So make sure that everyone's comfortable. Maybe, you know, do a workshop session and, you know, we can assist. But again, it's something that even car dealerships, I don't feel like they do it very well. They kind of go, there you go, off you go. You don't really get to learn. And the first time I ever drove an EV, I never knew how to charge it. And they're like, oh, you just go to these places and plug it in. I'm like, that seems too simple. Admittedly, it was about that simple, but having said that, it's still very nerve-wracking, and of course, other people standing around. So a bit like when you hire a car, you don't know how to open the fuel flap. You don't want to look like a clown. So a little bit of training, a little bit of knowledge always helps. I guess the old saying there too is, if in doubt, read the manual. That'll tell you some info as well. Next slide, please. So look, that's a very brief summary, I guess, of what I would consider to be important things to consider when driving or buying fleet vehicles. I've tried not to harp on too much about things. What I really wanted to do was just give you an idea that they are cheap to run. That's probably your biggest thing, that there are some benefits in it for organisations. If you're a company with a fleet of vehicles, it's definitely worth speaking to your accountant, getting some advice and looking at maybe bringing some of these vehicles into the mix. The fact that environmentally they do offer some things as well, and from a safety point of view, which is of course why we're all here, the newer the vehicle, the more safety features it has. So pretty much you can buy a brand new car now that's you know, will have way more features than a car that was 5 years ago. Like, we're seeing exponential gains, airbags and stability control, and just the general handling, construction of the vehicles. They keep improving the engineering around those things, and electric vehicles are very much at the cutting edge of that. So I feel like they should be considered. If you're in the commercial field, maybe not going to be an option. Hopefully we'll see some at least hybrid type systems, which I think will give us some short-term solutions to that, and that will be a good start too. So as you can see, the number of EVs on our roads doubled in 2022. You know, our internal combustion engine vehicles are still more suitable, particularly in the outback, remote areas where there's less infrastructure there. Make sure that when you are selecting vehicles for your drivers, consult with your drivers, consult with your team, make it more of a group effort. Probably one of the biggest feedbacks I get from nearly every company we deal with is that the vehicles are given to them, they're not consulted, and they could be in the car 6-8 hours a day and they've never spoken to the drivers. And some of them have got very valid points. You know, it might be, oh, the visibility out of this car is terrible, or reversing this car is hard, or the mirrors, or it could be other features. But get that feedback and then review with them. It'll create a better work environment for everyone, and ultimately that will make a safer environment as well. So that's really important. And finally, of course, engage in some training to get people familiar with the car, especially that performance in an emergency, how they brake, how they stop. And for those of you who are tuned in Tassie, of course, we've got some days coming up soon with WorkSafe where we'll be able to demonstrate some of these things. But if not, feel free to reach out and get that sort of training so that your team, if something was to go wrong, are less likely to have a crash. And if they are, it's only going to be a very minor one. And then also know what to do if they have a crash so that the vehicle in themselves is less likely to have an issue down the track. So that's about it from me. It's short and sweet today, but I'll hand over to Stephanie. Hopefully you've got some questions that will make me think a bit, and hopefully I can provide some valuable answers.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your presentation and insights into electric vehicles. And as Mark said, he has a few driver training sessions running during WorkSafe month, so do head to worksafe.tas.gov.au to have a look at what is still available to attend, whether it's a webinar or an in-person event down here in Tasmania. Please book yourself in. Numbers are limited as well. So if anyone does have any questions for Mark, please use the questions window on your control panel.
Depending on how we go with the questions, we would be interested too in your feedback if you are operating electric vehicles currently. Maybe if you've got some advice that you can share with us, because again, this is a new thing. So if you are currently using them, or you've looked into them, why you did select them or why you haven't selected them, all that information to us, can be shared. And I think this is the thing, it's a real shift in mindset to go down this path. There's not a huge push for it, but I definitely think there's some big gains to be had. So definitely interested in any experiences that anyone out there's had.
Mark, do you think that EVs will move into forklifts, etc.?
They pretty much have, I think. From what I understand, a lot of factory machinery and stuff now has gone full electric. Even side-by-side buggies now, if you use one on a farm, a lot of people are going to electric. And again, I can see the advantages there, just the lack of maintenance, the reliability, and even in a complete sidestep from all of this, I've been involved in aviation for a long time, and there's a big move into aviation now with electric power plants. Obviously the weight's an issue, but for short runs, we've got some trips here to King Island or Flinders Island, places like that. Electric aircraft would be perfect. Fits in with our environment, and they're quiet and all the other things. So I think we'll definitely see that technology spread out into other areas over time.
Thanks, Mark. Is thermal runaway a big issue if the battery is damaged in an accident?
I guess it's the biggest fear. So what they mean by thermal runaway is generally these batteries are made up of multiple cells, and if one cell is to breach and fail, it can then set the next one on, and it basically has a chain reaction. It hasn't been very common. Of course, when it happens, it makes the news because it's exciting and it's something that everyone's frightened of. And but if you really think about the amount of electric cars we see on our roads, I would have seen more burnt out cars on the side of the road that weren't electric than electric ones. I mean, obviously there's a lot more at the moment. I don't think it's a huge issue. I think, like anything, engineering is clever enough to hopefully protect those cells. And I guess to combat it, like I said, if you have had an accident, you need to put don't park the car in your house or in your carport. Leave it in an open space. If it was to go up, then it's in a safe place. But it really comes down to education. We struggle to get information on that stuff. We're actually working with TasFire, and even they're still coming up with policies around how to deal with electric cars. and that's how new it is. But to this day, it hasn't been a big issue, but it's definitely a factor that we need to keep in mind that can happen for sure.
All right, thanks, Mark. Do you see a market for electric motorcycles in the future?
Yep, and they're already coming. So again, my son's birthday is coming up, and he wants an electric trail bike, which is, just to go to show us old school people aren't interested in that sort of thing. But the new generation of people coming through, they can see the advantages. First of all, you don't have to kickstart it. It goes every time. They're actually pretty indestructible. The ones I've seen for trail bikes, they can operate in all conditions, hot, cold, mud, water, whatever. So I definitely think, again, we're going to see a market. I haven't seen many options available yet on the road, but I don't think it's very far away either. I guess the range, because it's small, having a small battery is always going to be an issue. But for, again, city, I mean, the closest thing we have obviously here in Tassie is the scooters. Love them or hate them, I guess they're a good idea. It's debatable about how they're managed, but there's certainly, and from a safety point of view, but I think that the fact that they are very efficient at getting people around, motorbikes and even small, I think there's a market for small, like almost like the future taxis, which are just almost self-driving, electric powered, just to do inner city stuff. And even though Tasmania doesn't have big cities, we're still pretty congested in Launceston and Hobart and Devonport and Burnie. So being able to get around quickly and efficiently, I think there is a market for that sort of thing. I put money on it. In 5 or 10 years, this conversation will be, how did we survive without that stuff? But for now, it seems a bit high, sci-fi, but it's not that far away, I don't think.
Thanks, Mark. Just your thoughts or insights into, I guess, the mining industry, and when or will they sort of ever be using EVs in mining? And is it because that there might be, I guess, a fear around fires underground?
So they're already using haul trucks again that are full electric. It's very common. We're talking 150, 200 ton trucks that are completely electric, and on top of that, autonomous as well. So there's not even a driver in them anymore. So they've been around for quite some time. And again, we're seeing more and more electric technology being involved, because particularly I've worked underground, and all those emissions in an underground environment are pretty harmful, because you've got to extract all the exhaust fumes and everything out, because that's the same air you're breathing. So by going to an electric vehicle, obviously less emissions, which means it's a safer and cleaner environment for those workers underground. So I'm not across it entirely, but I would say that they're already happening, and there's probably going to be more of it, because that risk of fire is always present in any machine, whether it's electric or internal combustion. I think that we're actually seeing battery technology is safer. When we talk about our mobile phones and the abuse that we give them these days, and dropped and smashed and put through the washing machine, whatever else, they very rarely ignite or have a problem. 20 or 30 years ago, it might have been a different story, but the technology is very robust. So those applications, again, it just becomes more and more common sense for them to go down that path.
Thanks, Mark. Besides Tesla, is there any other good and affordable EV brands that you are aware of?
Yeah, look, we've run a day for Tesla before in Melbourne. We've full disclosure, I do the TV ads for Kia, so we've done the EV6. And what I will say is that there's a full range of EVs. So in other words, you've probably got your MGs and a few of those cheaper brands, and then you've got your high end. You can go and buy a Porsche or an Audi at the other end of the scale. So you're talking anywhere from probably 50,000 to 250,000, and no different to any other car. They will all take you from A to B. It's just how they do that. And I'm not going to say that there's a lot of difference in safety. Construction and quality maybe will vary a little bit between them. But having said that, there's no reason why a cheap one isn't as safe as a more expensive one, as far as the battery technology and those sort of things go. So I think, yeah, by all means, have a look around, see what's in the price range. And, there's more brands now that you can poke a stick at. So we've recently had, 2 or 3 other brands at our programs, and they've all performed really well. They all do have different characteristics though, so it is really interesting to get in and drive a few. We're hoping, this is just early days, but we're hoping to run a day with electric vehicles to just invite the public and obviously companies and organisations to come along, and we want to try and get a sample from different manufacturers so people can come out and actually have a drive of them. Recently they did one in Queensland, which was really successful. So I'm hoping to get something off the ground here, because it is hard to go from yard to yard to yard, and it's nice to be able to drive a few back to back to get a comparison. But generally you get what you pay for as far as quality and build goes, but as far as safety goes, the latest cars are very, very safe. So there's no real disadvantage with going with the cheaper brands.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Are you able to give some insights into whole of life costs, and that includes, I guess, battery replacement, the average pricing for a EV battery, and approximately what age of the battery that might be required?
Yeah, so I don't have those figures because there's a lot of variables in there. From what I've been told, that depending on, I guess, how long you retain the vehicle for, then those numbers could change. I think the general lease arrangement of maybe 3 to 5 years, you're going to find that your running costs are considerably less than anything else. If we're talking 10 or 20 years, well, we don't know yet because we haven't got many EVs that are 10 or 20 years old. I mean, I've seen some of those Nissan Leafs and a few of the very first ones come up for sale and retain value. I think that overall, though, the running costs are definitely, I'm going to go with about a quarter of what you'd be paying for a conventional vehicle. So there's a big saving to be had. Even all your supercars now, they're all going down that path because it's just they get the performance, less running costs. There's just no real downside apart from the loss of the genuine old school sound and smell, pollution. That's all going away, but it's not as trendy anymore. So yeah, the savings are considerable. But again, a bit of research, I think you can find out a bit more about that. And again, I'd have a chat to an accountant because they'd have experience with other clients. Maybe they can give you some general opinions on what they've found to be average running costs and those sort of things. There is a Tasmanian, like a council for electric vehicles as well. I don't have their page handy, but if I find it, I'll maybe share it later on. And that's a body that are really promoting electric vehicles and the adoption of that technology here in Tassie, and they're experts in that field, so they certainly would be. I reached out to them when I was chatting to them about this stuff, and they were very helpful, and they're very good on statistics and numbers. So you can either just probably find them on Facebook or search for them, but otherwise we'll maybe put a link up if I can find one. So if you've got questions like that, they've probably got lots of data that they can provide to you as well.
All right, thanks, Mark. And to conclude, just a comment, some employers may offer an incentive to workers to purchase their own EV to allow personal EVs to be recharged at the office if not in use.
Yep, so there is, I understand there's a slight grey area with fringe benefits with charging your car at work. So just get some advice on that from the right people. I mean, accounting and tax law is very complicated, but I think that employers, a lot of employers are putting in solar panels, putting an EV recharge station, and it's a great incentive. As long as it's managed correctly and everything else, then I think that's definitely a step forward. So it's pretty exciting times. Hopefully we see some of you at the days we're running. We're going to have an electric vehicle there, so that's a good chance for those of you who have not seen one or been for a drive one. You can all come and experience that. And we're always happy to help with any consultation when it comes to those sort of things down the track as well.
Right. Thank you, Mark. So thank you to our WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar presenter today, Mark Butcher from Performance Driving Australia, with his webinar, Modern Fleet Vehicles, Fleet Vehicle Selection, Electric Vehicle Safety. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be made available at the end of October on WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page. WorkSafe Tasmania Month is an initiative funded by the WorkCover Tasmania Board and delivered by WorkSafe Tasmania. Please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au to see what other events are happening around Tasmania and online throughout October. So thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone for attending.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.